Chiefs Kingdom, welcome into the latest episode, the latest edition of the Out of Structure podcast, coming to you Tuesday, September 12th, week 2 of the 2023 NFL season. I'm Ron Kopp Jr., lead analyst at the site, arrowheadpride.com. With me, as always, my guy, Matt Stagner at StagDSP on Twitter. Stags, we are coming to the people today with great news, I think, right? Chris Jones is back in the fold, man. We got it. With the holdout is over. We're back, man. How you feeling about Chris Jones being back in the fold?
Hey, it's better than waiting until week 8, so we can start there. Hey, yes. Week 2 is better than week 8, so that's good. He's back in the mix, which is solid. Obviously, we would all love to be able to sit here today and say he's locked in for the rest of his career, and they don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. The fact that it's just a 1-year deal, tearing up this year's contract and replacing it with one that's pretty similar, adding in some extra incentives, is strange way to resolve this. But to me, it just says that they weren't going to resolve it, and he was just time to get back to work.
Yeah, no, we're getting right into it with the fact that Chris Jones is back. And like you mentioned, the deal isn't too much different than what he would have played on before, right? He's just got incentives now. And so the incentives for the deal, to break it down for the people, he gets $1 million if he plays 35% of the snaps. He gets $1 million if he plays 50% of the snaps. He gets $1.25 million if he gets 10 plus sacks this season. He gets another $500K if he gets to 15 sacks. And then, Stags, here are the juicy ones. $1 million to be a first team All-Pro and a Super Bowl appearance. But then another $2 million if he's actually the defensive player of the year and the Chiefs win a Super Bowl. A little parlay action to get $2 million for him. All that adding up to $6.75 million in incentives, going against $3.7 million in fines, Stags. That's kind of the crazy part here is, he's doing all this to maybe gain $3 million if he hits all of those, and if he doesn't hit the crazy ones, we're talking about only gaining maybe $1 million, $1.5 million. That's the crazy part about this, Stags. It really does feel like the Chris Jones side kind of realized or just kind of surrendered, wave the white flag, and this is kind of the most they could get out of what they got. Where the situation went.
Yeah, I thought it was suspicious that the announcement of him signing came from the team, and they spoke profusely about the agent, the Katz brothers. They talked a lot about how, they worked diligently to make sure they got this done, and that this was, credit to them for their great work. It really felt like somebody in this deal was trying to save face, and it wasn't Chris Jones and it wasn't the Chiefs. So it is a strange way to resolve this. It really, again, feels like they just punted. They said, you know what? We're not getting anywhere. Let's just give him a chance to earn back the fines, and we'll kick the can down the road till next year. That's what it looks like to me. And again, the agents are able to sort of spin it in a way that says, oh, we got him a raise. But when your raise is dependent upon you both being the defensive player of the year and winning the Super Bowl, those are two of the most lofty goals possible. And he's never been defensive player of the year. He's been, roughly in the running last year, but he's going to have an uphill climb to get to that level anyway. So that would be, a classic example of the not likely to be earned incentives that would be counted on next year's cap if he were to hit it, and not this year's. But to me, that raises another question: is how in the world are they going to pay for Chris Jones's current contract with the salary cap this year?
Right.
The whole idea here was to get a long-term deal, lowering that first year cap hit and clearing up space for this year and locking him in for the long term. They accomplished neither of those two things. So something is going to have to give with the rest of the roster over the next few days.
No, it's a really good point. Jared Sapp, I was kind of seeing his tweets this morning mentioning some of that. He can practice under a roster exemption right now. So the teams actually doesn't have to necessarily make any roster moves right now until Saturday at the latest, right? Because that's the latest they can activate him, put him on the active roster. and then have him ready for Sunday, which it does sound like he'll play. He's kind of mentioned that himself on Twitter. No reason why he wouldn't be playing in week 2. And so it is a really good point. Are we going to see some restructures from guys like Travis Kelce again? Mahomes. I mean, I'm not sure how likely that is. Harrison Butker is someone, maybe they could squeeze some money. Joe Tooney, if they don't want to cut him after this year, if they want to kind of keep him around for the remainder of his contract, he's got 2 years remaining. So it is interesting. It is interesting. They're going to have to do something. You make a good point, because I believe the number is, they need 7 or 8 million in cap space to make this work with his number. Now, the not likely to be earned incentives, you're right, does kind of lower it a little bit from the 25 mil he can make, but it's still about a $27 million cap hit, I believe, because that's the cap hit, and that's what they're going against.
Yeah, and the sack incentives, if you compare it against last year, those are probably likely to be earned, right? I mean, that's exactly what he did last year. So yeah, there's no cap relief in this deal for the Chiefs.
Well, shoot. And the thing with it too is, it was kind of curious, is that would the Chiefs do a no franchise tag deal with Jones to maybe that's a way that Jones could kind of win this side. Their agents could kind of say they won this negotiation, not being able to be tagged next offseason. But that didn't happen. And the Chiefs are still able to franchise tag him. And right now, that 120% of his cap hit would be $32.4 million. But Jason at Over the Cap actually mentioned on Twitter that because of that proration of him missing that first game and maybe some of that workout bonus too, it could actually only be about $30.5 million for his franchise tag number next year, which is very doable, again, for an elite defensive player. And it makes it a little easier, right, than maybe a $2 more million to trade him if they want to do that. It does put the Chiefs in good position next offseason as well to still have some of the leverage, even though that number is still pretty big. And having that big of a cap hit without, maybe necessarily knowing if you're going to trade him or not right away could be, could impact your free agency potentially.
Yeah, we could be looking at another Orlando Brown Jr. situation where they just decide not to trade him, let him test the market, and if they sign him, great. If not, they don't. You'd hate to see him walk without some sort of return. So I think tag and trade, would be a logical scenario in that regard. But as we look at the reported offers for Chris Jones from the Kansas City Chiefs, one of them reportedly, again, who knows what's true and what's not, but one of them reportedly was a 2-year deal, all guaranteed money that averaged something like 28 million per year. That essentially is the same thing as what he would get if he plays this deal out and gets tagged next year. So I could see why, from their perspective, the Jones camp perspective, you wouldn't necessarily want to sign that, because it's the same thing as guaranteeing yourself that you get tagged next year. Players don't like to be tagged. He's not going to want to be tagged. And so the Chiefs at least retain that option. Whether they choose to exercise it or not is still TBD.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's really interesting to see if, and we may never know, obviously, but, did the Chiefs still have that offer on the table, at this point? Or did they say, look, you've held out to this point, like, we don't want to maybe make that deal to this point. We pulled it. That might have been part of their negotiation to kind of, use their leverage now. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. I think, was it Albert Breer I saw on Twitter mentioned that there shouldn't be any acrimony between the Chiefs and Chris Jones moving forward, which, that's just a reporter saying that, you don't know for sure if there is going to be, anything in that sense. I'm curious though, Stags, maybe the last thing here is just, are we going to see an agency change, before too long? Because I really feel like all along, I've really felt like this agency really pushed the limit and maybe gave Chris some bad advice. And the fact that he missed a game, honestly, I don't think it ever needed to get to that point. And so I think in my opinion, to that extent, I wouldn't be surprised if Chris kind of maybe does before the next time he's negotiated that contract next offseason, gets a new agency.
Yeah, it's hard to speak to that. We don't know the ins and outs of their relationship there, but coming into the last year of a contract where he's already pretty well paid, it's not like he was going to starve if he didn't sign this deal this year. This was an odd time for this holdout to occur. It makes perfect sense if they were to franchise tag him next year and then he would hold out and fight against the franchise tag. Players do that all the time when they had that option. I know the CBA sort of restricted what they can do there, but it is strange to see this holdout at this point in the game when, what did they gain from it? And I think
Exactly.
looking back, revisionist history, you're gonna say, well, there's nothing to be gained from this holdout. So why even bother, taking it to the length that they did? Why not play out the last year of your deal and live to fight another day? Again, they're going to try to spin it now that, oh, well, we got him a raise this year, so it was totally worth it. But it's going to be tough for him to hit all those incentives, having already missed a game and
Yeah.
coming in without any training camp and a little practice. He's going to have to really hit the ground running and have another career type season. And so, yeah, is it a win to say for the Chiefs? You got a very motivated Chris Jones for 16 games plus the playoffs?
Yeah. Contract season back to back of Chris Jones. I think that can be looked at as a win for sure. No, and I do think though maybe a more experienced agency maybe would have understood that the Chiefs weren't budging, and so pushing it as far as they did wasn't going to help their case, and it didn't. And so that's my only point. But hey, Chris obviously has some loyalty, to an extent with these guys, and he has loyalty to the Chiefs because he never wavered. He always wanted to be here. And so shout out Chris. Can't wait to see him sacking Trevor Lawrence on Sunday. But that leads to the big question here, Stags. And we can get back into, the talk of a 0-1, finally. I know we kind of avoided it with this Chris Jones talk off the bat, but the Chiefs did lose their season opener in Arrowhead on banner night, 21-20 to the Lions. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to answer your questions later on too on this episode. You guys asked some good Twitter questions. Will say, make sure if you do want to ask them for future episodes, we're going to be dropping that question Monday mornings on the Arrowhead Pride Twitter account. It's going to tweet every Monday asking you for your questions. Make sure you submit them there. Or if you're not on Twitter or X, I guess it's called now, make sure you email it to apoutofstructure@gmail.com. We'll get them there too and can definitely answer any questions you got about the previous game, about the Chiefs in general, big picture. But I got a question for you, Stags. Can we kind of just forget about week one now? Chris Jones is back. Travis Kelce hopefully is not injured. All the rest of the AFC top tier lost, unless the Dolphins and Jaguars. If you want to call them. And hey, we lost to the Lions. They're not like an AFC contender. They're not going to affect the seeding necessarily. Can we just forget week one ever happened? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think we can move right past it. The Chiefs, played a pretty solid opponent in prime time on banner day. It was a weird game, missing two of their top three best players in coming into the start the season. A lot of things went wrong that if one of those little things went right, they win this game and we're having a totally different conversation. So yeah, I'm fine letting week one be preseason game number 4 and moving on into the regular season starting now. I think this Jacksonville game is going to be a really interesting matchup.
Well, before we get into that, let us talk through what we saw Thursday night. And you always put together the winners and losers on the site for us post game. Make sure you check that out. If you follow the site, make sure after every game you look at some winners and losers. Just a nice, fun way to recap what happened on the day. Highlights of the winners. I mean, obviously Mahomes. He dealt with a lot and still made some plays. He scrambled effectively. I think there was a lot there. But definitely want to shout out some of the go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say on Mahomes is it was kind of odd putting him in the winners category when his quarterback ranking and his yards per attempt and all that stuff were worse than what they typically are. But I think if you watch this game, this was clearly a frustrating game for him, a tough game for him, but one where he did enough to win this game and put players in position to make plays. It's pretty tough to fault him for what happened there.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I pointed out his passer rating was 77. It was the worst among his 19 games of his career where he has not been sacked, because he wasn't sacked on Thursday. He did not get brought down one time. The pass protection was pretty good for the most part. There were some breakdowns where he had to scramble out of it, but not getting sacked and having a 77 passer rating, that says that receivers weren't getting open or they weren't executing. And obviously we kind of saw that, and we'll get to that in the losers. But let's talk about Felix Anudike-Uzomah real quick and Trent McDuffie, some of these defensive players you put on here. Felix, I was impressed with how much he was able to create penetration. He's someone that wills his way into the pocket at times, and I saw that in the preseason. But I really didn't think he'd be able to do that right away against this Detroit Lions offensive line specifically.
It was a tough matchup for a rookie coming in, even a first rounder. You kind of want to temper expectations for these types of guys and say that they're going to work him in over the course of a season. But the Chiefs are going to have to lean on him a little bit more, given Charles Omenihu's suspension, given Chris Jones being out. They needed a pass rusher, and he showed a different element that maybe they haven't had, especially with Frank Clark gone. He was able to really get around the edge and nearly had a safety in his first NFL game. That would have been a really nice highlight for him to have, against the Lions. And he was inches away from that play. But yeah, 2 quarterback hits and 13 pass rush snaps is good production in a limited, debut. And he'll have a lot more opportunities going forward.
Well, the losers, we'll talk about plenty of this podcast, so we don't want to get into the majority of your losers. But you did mention the Kansas City running game, which I thought was a little just, blah. What did you see from the run game on Thursday?
Yeah, I mean, it felt predictable. It felt like the blocking wasn't always there, and when it was, the backs didn't seem to follow it, or the timing wasn't there. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I think there seems like there's some schematic or some play calling issues related to it. I don't want to put the blame on the shoulders of either of the running backs particularly. That's why I called out the whole running game as a unit, because it takes a lot of coordination for a running game to work well. It's not just, do you have a fast running back or do you have a good interior offensive line. But that's part of what concerns us about this running game, is the fact that the Chiefs have arguably the best interior offensive line in the league, and an absolute road grader at right guard that just destroys people in the run game when he gets a chance. Why aren't they better at running the football?
Man, I know. I tweeted a similar thing right after the game. Just why do we have the best interior offensive line, and why aren't we not able to convert short yardage scenarios? Why are we not able to, just run up the middle? I also pointed out Isaiah Pacheco, a lot of his runs were off tackle, not a lot of vertical, get downhill and get going up the middle. And if we can't create those kind of plays, you're wasting the talent you have in that spot, like you mentioned, in the interior offensive line. So,
and a lot of people pointed this out, and again, there's a lot more to X and O's than I'll ever totally understand. But why they call those outside zone plays to the short side of the field into just a pile of bodies, it's pretty tough to understand. I don't know. Do you have a perspective on that? Am I and the other people on Twitter missing something? Like it sure seems like if you're going to run a play that requires some spacing, you'd want to do it to the side of the field that's not compressed.
Absolutely. I think one of the things there, first of all, is just, in general, you do hit the backside for big runs on those kind of plays. And so the backside cut would be more into the, open space. But if you're running the play into the tight side too, the linebackers, everyone knows they have, less space to work with there, so they can maybe cheat a little bit back. So yeah, you're right. It is silly to me too. You just don't have the backs that get to the off tackle fast enough to really threaten linebackers, right? You want to run those plays when you have guys like, Jahmyr Gibbs. We saw him with the Lions. You want to have guys that can fly to the off tackle. I think guys like Pacheco can get there a little quicker than obviously Clyde can, but either way, that's just not necessarily their strength. And especially to me, from the shotgun position instead of under center, it's a lot harder for them to go from going completely horizontal to the sideline and then try to turn up and cut up and see those cutback lanes when they're from shotgun. Rather, if you're under center, you're kind of more, your chest is more forward most of the time. You can kind of see everything. That's impacting it too. I've never understood why they run outside zone so much from shotgun. Mahomes can run from under center. Just do it. I know it's not predictable it's not, they don't have their RPO game maybe from that as much, but the running backs would be benefited, and so would the offensive line, honestly.
It seems like as a running back, when you're under shotgun, you're a little bit more flat-footed when you start the play as well. Like you like to have that under center where you've got some forward momentum where you can hit that hole quick, and especially if you don't have the fastest running backs. I mean, obviously Pacheco's not slow, but but Clyde sometimes takes a little bit to get going. So I think you really want to, if you're going to run Clyde, you might want to run something that he can do effectively. And standing flat-footed in shotgun and running outside zone is just rarely ever going to be effective for Clyde.
Well, let's talk about more things from Thursday night, because before the game, people who listen, we kind of talked through a few things about the matchup. One thing was we were all concerned, right, about the Lions' offensive line overwhelming the Chiefs' defensive line without Chris Jones, without Charles Omenihu. Got to say, Stags, they held up. They held up pretty good. Guys like Mike Dana stepped up. He had the sack, and he played very well on the edge in the run game, in my opinion. Guys like Keandre Coburn, I think we're strong up front. Derek Nottie had one of his best games in a while. Got to give him credit. I'm someone that gets on him hard, but he was pretty stout against a good Detroit offensive line. I don't know. We got to feel good about this, right? There's nothing really to mince about this. I think the Chiefs defensive line showed up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Lions ran for 118 yards, which is not nothing, but it's not a lot. I mean, you're talking about under 4 yards a carry. And this is
that's the key right there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So they tried to run the ball 34 times. So that's they thought they could run the ball on this defense, and I don't think they got the results they were expecting. In the passing game, only one sack, on the day. But there was a decent amount of pressure. They manufactured some things. They had, as we talked about, Felix had a couple quarterback hits. They had Mike Dana got home once. L'Jarius Sneed got in the backfield a little bit. So they did what they can do without Chris Jones, and I don't think there's anything to hang your head about on the way this defense as a whole played. I mean, the fact that they only allowed 14 points from the Lions offense, outside of that pick six, this was a pretty solid performance and certainly gave the team a chance to win the game from the defensive perspective.
Yeah, I mean, Dana had the batted pass too. Karlaftis, he had a few pressures and a batted pass as well. The secondary, I think, played pretty well. At first, Justin Reed was a little shaky out of the gate, I will say, but he kind of locked in down the stretch, made a few key tackles. Trent McDuffie was very good, I will say. McDuffie seems like he's really coming in. And the linebackers were flying around a little bit. But yeah, I do think, overall the defense just did its job. And this really was one of those things where, let's flip to the other side. The Chiefs, offense, especially in the pass game, just didn't get it done. And I think you got to give credit to the Detroit defense. We were talking about it, but they really did, revamp it with guys like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They drafted Brian Branch, rookie Jack Campbell. All three of those guys were making plays. Obviously, Branch had the pick six off Tony's hands, but, he also made other plays. Jack Campbell was all over the field. I got to give him credit. He looks like a stud. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was closing in tight windows and just flying around. So, I mean, you got to give credit to Detroit for how they played. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, Aiden Hutchinson is a budding star in this league. I think they've got some talent there, and they play a pretty fun brand of football, and so you do have to give some credit to their defense. But really the concern for me, and I know we'll talk about the receivers' individual performances in a minute, but really look like schematically and from a route running perspective and from being on the same page, this offense was just really out of sorts. And that's concerning, obviously, in week one, where you have allegedly the whole offseason to prepare for this day, and then it doesn't turn out the way you want it to. But there's some guys who should have been pretty comfortable in this offense that sure didn't appear to be this week.
Yeah, no, I think one thing, and I know we will talk about it more, but Kadarius Toney, someone who didn't play the entire training camp or preseason, he didn't play a lot of snaps in this game either. He was one of the low snap counts on the receiver room, yet somehow ends up the most featured receiver of the entire group. And that may speak to maybe him creating separation, but at the same time, man, the way the ball was going, at him, the way he was, looking around the ball, his body language after some of these negative plays he had, he wasn't just a drop. There was another one where he faded into the linebacker too much and it got tipped away because of that. If he would have settled more, it would have been a big completion. Andy took blame for it. If you listen to Andy Reid on Monday specifically, he said, "Look, I'm gonna take some of the credit for or take some of the blame for Kadarius Toney maybe." Giving him a lot more than he maybe should have gotten right away. It was his first action of the season. And so it was perplexing to me, but I think it says, something about some other receivers too. So we'll talk about that. But there was just sloppy route running, sloppy route spacing. Blake Bell running routes definitely had something to do with that as well. Trust me. He was way too heavily featured in the not too heavily featured, but there were times where him being in there just kind of lumbering around kind of screwed some things up. So let's get Travis Kelce back, I guess is what I'm saying, Stags.
Yeah, Travis Kelce could get 100 targets this week. It's going to be Mahomes is going to be so happy to see him back out there when he drops back, because we talked a little bit about this in the pre-session here, but Mahomes really looked like he was a little indecisive. It looked like he didn't quite trust what he was seeing. He hesitated a little bit more than what you'd like to see. The only times in his career we've seen him do that mostly has been when he didn't trust the offensive line, when he felt like pressure was coming and he had to scramble, he had to get out quick, whatever. When you see him hesitating like this, the other time you saw it, I guess, was when defenses started switching to this, kind of the cover 2 scenario, right? That's when defenses were kind of playing back and taking away what he really wanted to do, made him hesitate a little bit. It seems like he was hesitating this week because guys weren't open, guys weren't where he expected them to be, guys were running into each other and running in front of each other and doing some stuff that you shouldn't see in an offense like this one, especially from relatively experienced players, the guys that were doing that.
Yeah, I know. And the thing is, the guys that were running probably the best routes and were made the biggest plays in the passing game were Justin Watson and MVS, the guys that have been here, a couple of years, the veterans, more, a little more reliable. They didn't get as many opportunities, obviously, as a Toney. But they both made reliable plays down the field because they were where they were supposed to be for the most part, right? No, it is interesting though. The Lions did come out and play a lot more zone coverage, I think, than maybe Chiefs anticipate. They only played 10 snaps of man coverage, apparently, according to Nate Tice on Twitter. Great follow as always. And that just kind of tells you that if you're not beating man, it's a talent thing for the most part. You're not winning one-on-one against another guy. But if you're not beating zone, it's a mental thing. It's I'm not running the routes correctly. I'm not running my spacing correctly. And that's what you saw. I mean, we all saw it. And so it makes sense why they struggled. These receivers just were not operating as cleanly in their routes, as they should have. And that all starts, I think, with maybe a Noah Gray over Travis Kelce. As much as Noah Gray has improved probably over his 3 years, he's not a Hall of Fame tight end that, literally just manipulates linebackers and safeties, rolling out of bed. I mean, he just absolutely puts on a clinic. When you don't have that in the middle of your defense kind of, messing things up, or in the middle of your, pass coverage messing things up, it does make everything harder for the receivers that maybe, 3 days before the game thought they were going to have a guy opening things up for them like that. So it is just one of those things where I'm ready to see that, like guys like Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, with Travis Kelce back in the mix. But we'll talk more about that as we get going.
Absolutely. I think Kelce is so effective because he's able to see that open space and anticipate, and he and Mahomes have that connection. And so having him missing, really, really does affect a lot of things. And yeah, their ability to bust zone coverage. We thought Sky Moore might be pretty good against the zone. He wasn't. Right. He wasn't great this week.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it is amazing to me. I mean, Sky Moore led the receiver room in snaps, but was primarily used as like a motion guy more so than a true, route runner downfield. Only saw 3 targets, and 2 of those were, out of structure. Shout out the podcast name. Not in the rhythm of the play, kind of late, obviously the desperation heave at the end of the game, but also the one play where Mahomes had to throw over the linebacker, tipped off Sky's hands. If you watch the beginning of that play, which I did post on Twitter, you can see that Sky was open immediately. Mahomes looked his way, kind of pumped it. And, I have people telling me that the linebacker, he kind of got too close to the linebacker, didn't settle down enough. In my opinion, there was plenty of window there for Mahomes to get it to Sky, in the rhythm of the play, get him going upfield. It would have been a big play in the game. It was on a 3rd down. I will say on the play, you could see maybe MVS kind of peeking out deep, and I think Mahomes maybe wanted to test that all of a sudden, and that's why he maybe pumped. But all of a sudden, once MVS was going deep, Aiden Hutchinson was in his face, and he had to kind of scramble. So it was kind of interesting. But all that to say, I think Sky Moore had just didn't give it a fair shake in this game in terms of the coaching staff giving him opportunity to make plays, Mahomes giving him opportunities to make plays, but that also could be an indictment on him. Why is he not getting those opportunities, even though he's a second-year receiver? Everyone's talking him up this preseason. So
yeah, man, you don't want to. This is not a comparison, but you think about Josh Gordon, who came in and got a ton of snaps and hardly any targets and did absolutely nothing when he had targets. You don't want to see Sky Moore go that way. I'm, again, not making the comparison to very different players, very different points in their careers, but there's some precedent there for Chiefs having receivers get a lot of snaps that are not really that involved in the offense.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the receivers with your guys' mailbag questions. You guys ask some good ones, but let's go to break here, Stags, and let me throw you our second edition of What NFL Player Am I? Again, weekly tradition. I'm always going to do a player that played for both the Chiefs and the Jaguars. So that's your first hint. Or Chiefs and our future opponent, which is the Jaguars this week. I played for the Chiefs and Jaguars, more of a starter in Jacksonville, then settled into a backup role in Kansas City. The university I attended starts with M.I., playing multiple seasons as a starting quarterback and earning the right to be drafted. And I have won a Super Bowl in my supporting role. Who could this be, Stags? Who could this be?
I'll give us some thought on break. Stick with us on the Out of Structure podcast. We'll be right back.
All right, we're back on the Out of Structure podcast, about to answer mailbag questions, talk about the upcoming Chiefs-Jaguars game in week 2. But Stags, I gave you some hints, gave you some clues on what NFL player am I that played for both the Chiefs and the Jaguars. Who did you come up with?
So I went right to Blaine Gabbert here from Mizzou, my alma mater. But you're saying there's a trick question here, so now I'm really starting to second guess myself. So I'm going to stick with Blaine Gabbert as my answer. But is there another answer to this question as well?
Yeah, no, it is a trick question, because I'm sure some people, maybe not Missouri minded, would straight to Chad Henne, who also was a starter in Jacksonville, also settled into a backup role in Kansas City, and also attended Michigan, Michigan. So hey, and he also won a Super Bowl. So yeah, I was seeing what I figured the Missourian you would think Gabbert right away. And if I did kind of set it up with the MI. I mean, you Tigers are probably the song probably started popping right through your head as soon as I said that. So.
We can spell. All right. Well, let's get to some mailbag questions here from our friends on Twitter, starting with the dude at the dude. Should Justin Ross and Rashee Rice get the majority of the snaps going forward? The eye test says they're the most talented receivers. Now, Ron did some work on the receivers this week on arrowheadpride.com. Make sure you check out his article. Tell me what you saw from Ross and Rice.
Well, yeah, Ross didn't get much of a opportunity this game, right? He played a few snaps. His only target was just in quick game, kind of a just 5-yard completion. Rashee, though, you gotta give Rashee credit. He was someone that made plays in the scramble drill. Definitely caught that touchdown with he ran his route correctly, found that space and settled. He didn't keep moving. That's a good thing. That's what we've been talking about, this zone coverage stuff. And on that touchdown, he worked into space and settled, and then put his hands up, and good hand strike for Rashee. He's been hitting the ball, the ball drill. Wow, I can't even think of what it's called.
Judge machine.
Yeah. Judge machine. So I am impressed with Rashee. I do want him to continue playing, but I think he got a good number of snaps for with all 7 receivers healthy. I think that's kind of how many you need to see from him, maybe right away. I don't think necessarily that needs to change or not, because I do think there's definitely some rookie stuff. I pointed out on Twitter there was one, play where he's running a curl route, and again, Tony did this too, but he just kind of, Rice on this one kind of just sinks too much into the safety when if he just settles, he's just into a wide open throwing window, but he just kind of kept moving. It kind of dissuaded Mahomes from throwing to him because the safety was a little closer, closing in on him, and Mahomes tried to scramble. It was a 3rd down failure. So there are little things still with all the receivers, and Rice is still a rookie. But I was impressed with Rice. I do think he needs to play. I mean, he did. That's the thing. I think he did play quite a bit. So I don't think it's something that needs to be necessarily like, changed too much. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Rice had a drop, right? But he also had a big catch and run and his first NFL touchdown. I mean, it's a really good start for him overall. Justin Ross, very limited action, like you said. I don't think they're going to change anything at this point, but maybe they were to some extent trying to just try out all 7 of these receivers and kind of see what combinations work and who fits into what role. Maybe they're still trying to feel that out with Kadarius Toney just coming back. I would love to see both of those guys continue to get work. I'm just not sure who it should be at the expense of, given where everybody else plays.
Yeah. Well, Richie James played 23 snaps. Rasheed played 20. So maybe you could say, maybe Rasheed can play a little more than Richie, although I think they like Richie and some of the, getting vertical stuff. He was running some posts, some of the deep stuff to be, pushing safeties deep. Although I think Justin Watson did a really good job at that and MVS too. So I don't think they necessarily need Richie James too much for those things. And he was kind of that Toney replacement, maybe. Well, if Toney's here, and that's the one thing I will say about Toney is guys, he was getting open. I mean, the reason Mahomes kept throwing to him was because he was open. They were featuring him on plays. There was actually one play that they tried to get him on a kind of leaking vertically on the backside of a play action, and the Lions just covered it up and also had some pressure, kind of took it away. But the Chiefs coaching staff clearly wants to go to him and clearly wants to use him, and he clearly kept, getting into open space, and Mahomes kept throwing to. So, drops are just one of these things where they are volatile. Like you can't predict drops, over, year over year. A lot of times receivers, it's just up and down. Sometimes, some people are definitely worse at drops than others. But I think if Toney just play, I think those can be corrected. And so it is kind of funny. He had such a terrible game, but he also, kept getting those opportunities for a reason over the other receivers.
Yeah, you've kind of already answered Dan Grubb's question here. Will Mahomes have the confidence to throw to Toney this week? I do think they'll probably go right back to him, and I think he's a special talent as far as the way he moves on the NFL football field, and I think they're going to continue to try to get him involved. Andy Reid has also had a history of when a guy makes a mistake, giving him a chance immediately to make up for that. When you see a guy have a turnover, they go right back to that guy 9 times out of 10, it seems like. So I don't think there's going to be any step back for Toney. I think this was they'll chalk this up to a bad game and they'll move forward.
I will say, though, I'm curious to see 15's confidence throwing to Sky Moore as the season goes on, just because, man, it was weird that he just was shaky going to him on that one play, and they just didn't really want to use him. This is someone they hyped up this preseason. This is someone everyone had good things to say about his progression, and he said he's no longer thinking about what he has to do. He just has to beat the man in front of him. It just seems like that's not maybe the case. So I'm really curious to see if they go back to him, if 15 feels more confident going to him more than I am Toney.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like Sky Moore should have a really high volume role in this offense. A lot of targets, a lot of the Juju Smith-Schuster stuff. He should be the reliable guy, the steady chain mover of this offense, and didn't look that way last week. I expect that they're not done trying with him. They've got enough invested in Sky Moore that they're going to keep going back his way. But you're right. There's a chemistry issue that seems like it needs to work itself out when it comes to Moore and Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, even his only target in rhythm, like I mentioned, he had 3 targets. 2 of them were kind of, outside of the play. His one target in rhythm was kind of behind him, and it looked like maybe a bad throw by Mahomes. But if you can kind of see maybe Mahomes being like, it was a quick slant from the slot, and maybe Sky just didn't run it with the correct angle, not the correct timing. With Mahomes, I tend to think he's the one right on it when the ball is maybe behind, and again, he was kind of verbally doing the McColl stuff, which we always talked about, right? Stags was we always could see it on TV, like you could see Mahomes doing that right after incompletion to McColl. You hate to see that with Sky. I hope that's not a trend. And because I do want to see Sky's ability. I feel like he still could be a really solid receiver for this team.
Yeah, I think Mahomes, there was others that have pointed out that maybe he was trying not to lead him into a hit, So he was kind of putting it more on his hip
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to leading him more where he could have gotten lit up. He does a pretty decent job of not putting his receivers in a situation where they're going to be exposed. And so, yeah, maybe it's not where he expected the ball, the receiver expected the ball, but it's where the quarterback put it for his own best interest. So, there's a lot of questions here about getting new wide receivers. So, golf me at Sportsnet STU. If we pick up a veteran wide receiver, can they pick up the playbook in short order? We've got KS Chaser 1 on Twitter. Is catching the ball not a trait that the Chiefs value highly in when they acquire wide receivers? And then there's another question from the dude. Should we trade up for Marvin Harrison Jr.? Do you see the Chiefs adding to the wide receiver room in any of these ways, whether free agency or a huge move up in the draft next year? Are they looking for help in that room, or do they think they just need to sort it out amongst the guys they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think this year, I think they're good. I think the 7 receivers they have, they're gonna work and try to develop them still, right? Obviously, we're 1 week in. We both know, Stags, like you've been saying, like we just need to give it a little time. So yeah, the veteran receiver thing I would say is out. Although, it is interesting. Maybe there's a case Brett Veach is, if you got him a little truth serum, would he tell you that, I wish the Chris Jones deal got done so I could have maybe went after DeAndre Hopkins more aggressively, or something like that. But I will say next year's draft, yeah, I do think if it keeps going this way, I think you do need to just draft receivers, pretty much every year. You're going to potentially cut MVS after this year. Justin Watson, shouldn't necessarily be back. It really would just be Kadarius Sky and Rasheed and Justin Ross, which, hey, that's a pretty solid group. But, if none of them develop, I think Rasheed maybe, looks like on a good path right now. And again, we're going to see with Sky as the season progresses. but yeah, no, I think you definitely want to draft pretty high, but we're not. I don't think you need to trade up. But we'll see.
We can talk ourselves into the wide receiver room as it stands today. I think it's, again, premature to start really worrying and panicking about who they have on the roster. I think if anything, they need to maybe focus. I think there's been others that made this comment as well, but need to focus on getting the right combination of receivers on the field and letting them cook. Give them some extended looks. When you have Justin Ross getting 6 or 8 snaps, like that's never going to lead to any substantial production. You've got to really have the right guys on the field, getting comfortable with each other, getting comfortable with Mahomes, and have some continuity there and have some extended action for a smaller group of receivers. You can't do that with 7 receivers. So they're going to have to whittle their current group down before really knowing what they have. And then I will say Marvin Harrison Jr. looks like the best prospect since Calvin Johnson. Like he's really a really spectacular wide receiver prospect coming out of college this coming year. He's going to go top 5. And for the Chiefs to draft top 5, unless something goes catastrophically wrong with the rest of the season, it's going to cost them their entire draft and then some, and it's just not going to happen. So I wouldn't get your hopes up about Marvin Harrison Jr. coming to the Chiefs, but it is a good wide receiver class overall. And our draft team will be diving into that over the coming months. But I think you'll see he's not the only name that should be in play.
Yeah, there's guys out there. There's guys. Malik Neighbors and then Adonai Mitchell or Xavier Worthy from Texas. Either of them, I think both of them are going to be fun. So definitely some receivers to be excited for in the draft next year, potentially in that realm. But let's answer Thomas Ramirez's question too. What was more disappointing, the wide receivers not catching the ball or wasting a good defensive game? Because it was a good defensive game from the unit. I think that is an interesting question, because as much as I was, banging, my head against the wall when Tony dropped his 3rd, 4th pass of the game that would have set them up to kick a game-winning field goal. When you think about it, you just feel bad for the defenders that really stepped up. I mean, I would say so.
Yeah, again, the defense did what they needed to do. Could they have made a couple more plays, on that last touchdown drive? Maybe, but overall, it was a very good effort by the defense. And this one does fall on the offense when it comes to blame. So that is quite disappointing. You know, it's interesting that the Chiefs, I always felt like they have trouble overcoming drops. And I don't know if it's only a Chiefs thing or if this happens across the league, but drops seem to really derail an offensive drive. I don't know if it's just demoralizing for the receiver, for the quarterback, for both, for the play caller, probably like, hey, we had this drawn up. We got the guy right where he needed to be. The quarterback puts it right where it needs to be. You know, that's supposed to be a first down. That's supposed to be a conversion. I mean, the Chiefs were, 1-2 plays away from field goal range, there at the end. And this really could have been a different story. So I still think the biggest disappointment is at the feet of the offense and really these receivers who we've been pretty excited about at different times for different players, to have them all collectively struggle as much as they did. I mean, MVS had the one big highlight, the best catch of the day in traffic, took a hit. That was a spectacular catch, but otherwise the wide receiver room as a whole really, really struggled. And so that is disappointing.
Yeah, no, it's true. And because we all did get really excited about them preseason. I mean, we all, very, hyped them up a lot. There's a reason they kept all 7. Hey, Amir Smith-Marset, he might have been able to make a play on Thursday, I mean, that's they had a lot of guys in there making plays. So you definitely were, we're a little disappointed again with Sky. I was someone that was very confident we'd see an uptick in target from him in week 1, but excited to see everyone kind of develop. It definitely challenges them, put some pressure on them to develop, and that's never a bad thing. This team, it's easy to act like they can be not have any sort of Super Bowl hangover in terms of like being too confident. But hey, they did win a Super Bowl, and there are some things where maybe they needed a little reality check to really zone in and progress. These young players.
Yeah, I got it out of the way early. Hopefully, this is the one bad loss from the season, like the Colts game last year, where you look back and say, man, how'd they lose that game because the rest of the season goes so well. So hopefully that's the way this goes. One more question here from Ted Lee. Defense played well except for some missed tackles. Is that going to be it says missed tackles are going to happen. Did you see anything concerning from missed tackles this week? I think I saw that. Did Snead get credited with 4 missed tackles? Did I see that right?
Yeah, and I credited that too. Maybe Snead not playing a lot of the preseason. He's been hurt, but PFF did mark him with 4 missed tackles. Led the team. It was actually the first time he's ever marked 4 missed tackles in a game in his career, according to PFF. He's only hit 3 once before in his career, so very sure tackler. We all know that, and so it's not something maybe to be concerned with. But he wasn't the only one. I think there were some other missed tackles too. But it's week 1. The Lions are a physical team. They have Dane Campbell as their head coach. They're going to be feisty and nasty. They probably went after it in training camp too. So, I think was it that one play early in the game? Yeah, I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs barreled over Justin Reed and Brian Cook back to back. So there were some ugly moments, but it's week 1. I think we kind of always see this a little bit with Spag's defense, where it takes him a few weeks to really get into tackling. He admits that. I bet he'll tell you that next time he talks to the media.
Yeah, I mean, with the fact that, again, evolution of the CBA, they're not able to play in pads. They're not able to hit as much as they used to in training camp. Tackling is one of those things that you would expect to take a couple of weeks for them to really get in the flow of. Some of these guys haven't had a lot of live reps tackling since last season. So, and some of those guys were in college when that happened. So it's a young defense. It's early in the season. I don't think it's anything to worry about quite yet. Again, from a big picture perspective, they were able to get the Lions off the field enough on defense this last week that they did enough to win, especially missing their best player. And hopefully, as we go to the next week, with Chris Jones in the fold, Travis Kelce should be back in the fold. How are you feeling about the Jaguars matchup for the Chiefs?
Yes, let's get into that week 2, which, I'm just going to pretend it's week 1. It was weird, Stags. They did unveil the Super Bowl banner preseason week 4. It was kind of odd. I'm not sure why they did that. It's week 1 starting on the road in Jacksonville, season opener. We're feeling good. No, just it is important, those Stags here. And I kind of had this as our last point, but let's start with it. It's really important they avoid going 0-2. I know no matter what, even if you feel good about the team, going 0-2, only 11% of NFL teams since I think it's like 1990 or something have made the playoffs. It's just a hard hole to overcome, especially in a hard AFC, even though the other teams contending with you are 0-1 somehow too. It is really important that there's some pressure in this game to not start 0-2 and kind of dig themselves in that hole when they still obviously have stuff to figure out. But I am interested to see, though. We talked about the Chiefs defense stepping up. They have a tougher time this week, in my opinion, especially like in the back end. Calvin Ridley looks back, very back. Him and Trevor Lawrence's chemistry, their connection week one was very impressive. And he's going to be a tough task for McDuffie, for Snead, whoever's really, tasked with following him in or out of the slot. He's going to play outside a lot too, obviously, but he's just going to play everywhere. But they still have Christian Kirk, who, if you guys remember, gave Snead a lot of trouble last year in the regular season matchup. Really torched him, honestly, a few times. They have Evan Ingram, who I think is a very tough matchup for a guy like Justin Reed. He'll have to step up. He's the guy usually covering tight ends and pass downs. Spags has shown very much so. And so, yeah, I think Trevor Lawrence is a better quarterback too. He can make more throws than Jared Goff. So I think they have a very tough matchup this week with the Jaguars pass game, but it's easier up front, I think. And especially having Chris Jones, right? Stags. I mean, that's kind of the key there. And the Jaguars offensive line isn't that good, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, they've got some talent. There's a lot of names I recognize when you look through the list of their depth chart. But they haven't been able to put it all together from an offensive line perspective. But they are a talented team, especially across the skill positions. And the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, is nobody to take lightly. This is a guy who went toe-to-toe with the Chiefs in the playoffs last year and gave them literally all they could handle in that matchup. So I think there's a real concern here that you don't want to take this team lightly. But, yeah, their passing offense, Zay Jones, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk doesn't sound like murderer's row for receivers, but they do create some problems. And I think Calvin Ridley is starting to reestablish himself as a potential, legit number one receiver in this league. So hopefully you get him on your fantasy team. And if so, you might want to, I don't know if you want to start him this week or not, but you probably do after last week's performance.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Lawrence, I think, is ascending to that kind of quarterback where, he likes having that wide receiver one, and he's going to hammer him, and he's going to, and their offense is going to allow him to. But that's the thing up front. The Jaguars' offensive line is dealing with an injury. First of all, Brandon Scherf, one of their better guards, I think their best guard. Obviously, he's a kind of a veteran signed to a good contract. He's dealing with an injury from week one. I don't think he'll be able to play. They're starting Anton Harrison, who I loved as a draft prospect, but not someone maybe immediately I thought was going to be a great pass protect, a great player. I think he needs a few more years before he's, really truly. I do think he's a solid player right away too, but I think he just has a high ceiling. But he's still a rookie offensive tackle that Karlaftis and Felix get to play. Felix played him quite a bit in the Big 12, right? He's got some experience going against Anton Harrison, as a pass rusher with K-State and him at Oklahoma. And so I think there's definitely a matchup to be exploited up front with Chris Jones back. I mentioned the guard injury. They have a center who's pretty good, but it's the second year. I do think, they're going to be able to get to Trevor Lawrence a little bit, and that's going to be the key to this game. If they can't get to Trevor Lawrence, even with Chris Jones, that I think he's going to be able to find matchups to exploit in the secondary, especially because also, Travis Etienne looks pretty good in the open field, and so he could have a similar Jahmyr Gibbs impact if they kind of get him going in that role as well. So it's definitely one of those things where the Chiefs offense is going to have to, I think, match with what, kind of keep up with scoring again. But, hopefully it doesn't look like what they did in week one. I mean, it can't. Not with Travis Kelce.
Yeah. In that vein, let's talk about their defense. They've got some pass rushers, at least in name, that should be up and coming. I haven't seen exactly what they saw in Trayvon Walker from last year. But
yeah,
there's a couple of names on this defense that they'll have to at least pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean, Josh Allen had 3 sacks week one, so I mean, he did tear up the Colts' offensive line to an extent. Although Anthony Richardson, being a rookie quarterback, is going to invite some sacks, maybe a little more, than maybe a typical quarterback would. But yeah, Trayvon Walker, he's just a physical freak, but definitely not someone that has shown, more than just that so far. and so he'll be a good test for guys like not even a good test, I should say, but I think we have a good advantage in the matchup for, guys like Jawan Taylor, Donovan Smith, veterans that can deal with kind of a physical freak, but doesn't have any, plan to him. I think they kind of like dealing with those kind of guys, not having to, maybe deal with the mental struggles or the mental game as much maybe, but we'll see. I mean, it's only been, I didn't get to look too hard at the Jaguars defense week 1. It looked like the Colts put some points on them. They were doing their thing. Even with Richardson kind of maybe having some rookie struggles, they came down to it. The Jags kind of had to pull that one out at the end, although they were helped by a really crazy defensive score. The Colts had a crazy fumble recovery that probably shouldn't have happened. But all that to say is I think the Chiefs offense has a good matchup this week. I think even better maybe than last week. I think the Lions defense is better than the Jaguars defense. They just have more playmakers. I think they proved that. The Jaguars defense has a lot to be desired, in the back end, especially. I will say their corner's name. He is good. Tyson Campbell. He's kind of coming on. He's a low key player that's gonna be a well known name this year, I think. But besides that, they have a lot of guys that names, but haven't put it all together, and so the Chiefs should have an advantage if they have Kelsey back in the lineup and everything.
Yeah, and I think this Chiefs team is going to be motivated to avoid that 0-2 start, to get back on track, to show that last week was a fluke when it comes to the receivers, to show that, hey, the band's back together now with Kelsey and Chris Jones, and this is a Super Bowl contender again. They've got to reestablish themselves. They got to do it in a hurry, and I think they didn't expect to lose week 1 even without those guys, and so there's going to be some extra added motivation from the Chiefs side. I think you'll see a big Patrick Mahomes game again, but maybe some of those first week jitters won't be there for the receivers, and this will be more of a shootout on the Chiefs side.
Yeah, I think it will be, and they're gonna have to be ready for that Jacksonville Heat. I know they train in training camp in St. Joe, so they should be prepared. But that early September Jacksonville Heat is a lot. These young receivers, they're gonna have to play. So you might see a healthy rotation of everybody: pass rushers, receivers, running backs, just to keep everybody fresh. But yeah, I do think it'll be more of a track meet than anything. But hey, if Chris Jones shows up and really blows it up, then I think there is a chance the Chiefs could come out with a pretty comfortable win, because I think the rest of their defense played pretty solid. And so if Chris Jones is elite right away, I think the rest of the guys can kind of shore it up from there and maybe hold them to a decent point total and let the Chiefs offense do their thing. So I don't know. Do we want to throw out predictions? I mean, I haven't even thought about a score prediction, Stags. What do you think? I
haven't either. I was just thinking the same thing. I mean, we can agree that big picture, this is should be a bounce back game for the Chiefs offense. I could see it something like about a touchdown, maybe a 10-point victory. Call it something like 35-24, something like that. I think that would be maybe my prediction. I haven't done that yet either, but I think this is going to be a bounce back game for the offense, and the Jaguars won't get shut out. But I think this Chiefs defense is going to continue to shine. You got a lot of young players on that defense that just are playing solid football and should continue to get better. So I think that the arrow is pointing up on the defense, and the offense is going to try to spike off of a down week last week.
Yeah, I will say the Colts secondary didn't have anybody like Trent McDuffie to help with Calvin Ridley. I think McDuffie, I'm so excited to see him throughout this season. Just, I think we are going to see him ascend into, one of the true elite corners, coverage corners. And he looks like it to me. And he plays, he comes up and plays, the run well too. Big McDuffie fan, excited to see him this season. But yeah, it's funny. Before the season, way early, I had a way too early season prediction, and I had the Chiefs losing this game back in March or April or whatever. Actually, I guess it was like May when the schedule got released, and it was more just because, like, I do think coming off the high of Banner Night, smacking the Lions around a little bit. That was my thought process. That did not happen, and so I think you're right. I think the motivation's flipped, and as much as the Jaguars should be motivated, obviously, from losing to the Chiefs last year in the playoffs and losing last year in the regular season as well, I think the Chiefs have a little more motivation trying not to start 0-2. Andy Reid, going to do whatever it takes to win this game, come back to Arrowhead against the Bears week 3, a little more comfortable in that setting. So I think you're going to see, a big game from the Chiefs offense this week for sure. So I don't want to say, a 10-point game, but I'll give them a one-score win for sure, something like 38-31 or something.
And there you have it for this week's edition of the Out of Structure Podcast. Matt Stagner here with Ron Kopp Jr. Thanks for sticking with us. We'll talk to you every week, every Tuesday now. Make sure you get those questions in, rate and review this podcast and the rest of the network, and check out our work on arrowheadpride.com. And we'll talk to you all next week.